Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, Tennessee Titans training camp starts today, and it makes it a perfect time for me to give my official 53-man roster prediction. Who do I think is going to make the team when it's all said and done? I'm going over every position and all 53 spots on today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. Let's get it.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Titans fans, training camp has arrived. The season is officially ready to go. We're going to have football practice to talk about. A lot of roster battles are going to be up for grabs during training camp. So much going on as we lead up into the 2022 Tennessee Titans season. Today, I am giving you guys my official 53-man roster prediction. Before we get into that, I do want to thank you guys again for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day. The number one daily Tennessee Titans podcast in the world. Make sure you subscribe on whatever platform that you do stream. Locked On Titans is free and available on all platforms. That includes the Locked On Titans YouTube channel. Subscribe there. Smash the notification bell. Throw a thumbs up if you're watching the video right now. It goes a long way to supporting the channel. I do greatly appreciate it. You can find me on social media at Tic Tac Titans on Twitter, at Locked On Titans Pod on Facebook. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content from now until next summer. Make sure you stay locked in to the Locked On Titans podcast. But moving into my 53-man roster predictions, my official predictions here, we got to start with the offense. And at quarterback, I've said this throughout the entire offseason after the draft pick of Malik Willis, and I'm going to stick with it. The Titans will keep three quarterbacks with Logan Woodside as the primary backup to Ryan Tannehill and Malik Willis truly in a red shirt situation. Hopefully, at some point in the year, the Titans find a way to utilize Malik Willis's athleticism with some packages out on the field, short yardage, goal line, red zone, all those situations. I think they could utilize his talent, but for the most part, that's my read on the situation right now. And one thing that does have to be acknowledged is Logan Woodside's ability to run the scout team. When the Titans have show team, which is in practice, the Titans defense has to go against an offense that is pretending to be the team that they're going to play the next week. That's how scout team or show team works in football. And Logan Woodside, from what I have heard and what I have confirmed, does a great job not only with what the Titans offense asks him to do, but also does a great job of giving the Titans a good look in practice at the opposing offense that they're going to be seeing. So with all of that in mind, three quarterbacks for the Titans, an extra +1 than we are used to seeing the Titans have with normally two quarterbacks. What I like to do is go back to the year past and see what the roster looked like, how many quarterbacks they keep, how many wide receivers, offensive line. But the Titans were stricken by COVID at the end of the preseason last year. Ryan Tannehill wasn't even on the roster. Half the starting offensive linemen and wide receivers weren't on the roster. The two top tight ends. So considering that, it kind of makes it a fruitless adventure, if you would. So we will just continue plowing forward here. Wanted to let you guys know how I usually would tackle that, but last year was just so strange. Glad we don't got to deal with that this year. At running back, it was a tough decision, but I put a priority on players who could play special teams. So I went with 5 backs for the Titans: Henry, Haskins, Hilliard, Cannon, because Cannon could be a gunner on coverage teams and as a kick returner. And then, of course, Torrey Carter, the starting fullback for the Titans, who I think is going to have an awesome year. At wide receiver, I initially only had 4, but I decided eventually to go with 5. And I'm going with Robert Woods, Treylon Burks, Nick Westbrook-Akina, Kyle Phillips, who are locks for me. And then at 5, I'm going with the 6'3" speedster, Josh Malone, former Tennessee Vol. coming over to the Titans in the offseason. I think his skill set, his size is going to be important. And I think with all of the special teams concessions that I'm going to make on the roster at other positions, wide receiver is a position where I don't need a ton of special teams value right now outside of Kyle Phillips returning punts and Nick Westbrook-Akina maybe doing some coverage still on special teams. But with his prominent role as a wide receiver, I would expect his special teams role to maybe be scaled back. But 5 wide receivers, 5 running backs, 3 quarterbacks at tight end. I have said throughout the offseason, I expect the Titans to go back to their heavy tight end packages. And you can't just have 3 tight ends if you want to be in 12 and 13 personnel consistently week to week throughout games. Now, Tommy Hudson starting the training camp on the physically unable to perform list. I hope he's not out too long, but when his injury happened in the OTAs, it did feel rather serious. So if that's the case, it's going to put Hudson behind the 8 ball, unfortunately. But on the other side, it's going to give a guy who had a major injury last year major opportunities to make the team, and that is Briley Moore, the guy out of Vanderbilt, tight end. And I think that the Titans do keep 4 tight ends. Let me say this. I think that Tommy Hudson ultimately spends more time on the Titans roster this year, but because of the injury, I think that Briley Moore gets that initial 4th tight end spot. I think Michael Pruitt, if he proves he's healthy coming back from injury throughout the season, could come back and take that spot. I think Tommy Hudson, when he gets healthy, I think Tommy Hudson will start on the practice squad originally and find a way to take that spot eventually. But for the initial roster, give me Briley Moore there because I think the Titans want to have 4 tight ends for the way that they're going to play offense. The offensive line. This was a tough one. I typically would like to keep 9, but again, in lieu of special teams players on defense, having 3 quarterbacks, 5 backs in the backfield, 4 tight ends, I decided to only go with 8 offensive linemen, and the versatility of some of the offensive linemen allowed me to do that. At tackle, of course, we're going to have Taylor Lewan, Dylan Radins, Nicholas Petit-Ferrer. At the interior offensive line, we're going to have Ben Jones, Nate Davis. And then I'm going to go with Jamarco Jones and Aaron Brewer. Both of them, I think Jamarco Jones ultimately is the starter. Aaron Brewer is the primary utility backup on the interior. And then I'm going to have Corey Levin also in the mix. That way, if Brewer has to start, Jamarco Jones can focus on tackle responsibilities a little bit more. And then you have Corey Levin, an interior offensive lineman, there to still have that primary interior backup. So I think with Jamarco Jones having the ability to be a 4th offensive tackle if needed, you go with the extra interior offensive lineman and Corey Levin to make up your 8-man group. So that's what I would do there. So that's my offense. Ryan Tannehill, Logan Woodside, Malik Willis, Derrick Henry, Hassan Haskins, Dontrell Hilliard, Trent Cannon, Torrey Carter, Robert Woods, Traylon Burks, Nick Westbrook-Akina, Kyle Phillips, Josh Malone, Austin Hooper, Jeff Swaim, Chiga Okonkwo, Briley Moore, Taylor Lewan, Dylan Radins, Nicholas Petit-Ferrer, Ben Jones, Nate Davis, Jamarco Jones, Aaron Brewer, Corey Levin. That's the Tennessee Titans offense, in my opinion. Let me know what you disagree with, what you agree with there, what your predictions would be down below and on Twitter at TicTacTitans. Before we get into the defense, I'm also going to talk about who I want to see on the practice squad and special teams at the end of today's show. But we're going to go defense next. Before we get into it, do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Dave. So let's all be honest with each other here. We've all been in a situation in our lives where we're a little tight on cash. Maybe you need a few extra gallons in the gas tank. Maybe you got another wedding invitation and you got to find a way to get a gift. Maybe you're just a little bit behind on your bills. Either way, that's a place where Dave can help. You're living paycheck to paycheck. You're struggling to make ends meet. Sometimes you need a helping hand from future you. Dave is a banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with their program Extra Cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy that wedding gift, or catch up on those bills. You can finally take the expenses that you've been stressing about and get rid of them without any hangups. There's no interest. There's no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief that they need with Extra Cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave. And again, think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Future you will thank you. Titans fans, training camp is here. The football season has arrived. Now, I do want to put this note out here. The Titans will be arriving on Tuesday. The veterans, the rookies already checked in on Saturday. The veterans will be arriving on Tuesday. And in my experience from previous years, that first day of training camp is all about physicals, getting checked in, position meetings, things like that, setting the stage for what's to come. I don't think the Titans will be hitting the field until Wednesday at the earliest. So tomorrow's show, we're going to do more of a traditional training camp primer where I go over some of the biggest questions remaining for the Tennessee Titans on the team, like the starter at left guard, Caleb Farley as a starter on the defense, some of the depth questions. Do the Titans have enough at certain positions? We'll talk about all of that on tomorrow's show. But diving back into my 53-man roster prediction right now, we just did the offensive side of the ball, had 3 quarterbacks, 5 backs in the backfield, 5 wide receivers, 4 tight ends, and then 8 offensive linemen. So working with those numbers going forward into the defense here before we get into it, want to thank you guys again for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day. Again, Monday through Friday, daily, free Tennessee Titans content here on the Locked On Titans podcast, on the Locked On Titans YouTube channel. It's going to be a great season, guys. Just make sure you get subscribed and stay looking out for the content I'll be dropping every single week. But looking at defense, we'll start on the defensive line. And no real surprises up front. You have Jeffrey Simmons. You have Danico Autry. You have Teair Tart. You have Naquan Jones. Those are guys who I think are definitely going to make it. There's going to be some spots open at the interior defensive line positions I think we're battling for. I talked about that when we did our training camp preview, and I talked about the bubble. I think ultimately, a guy who could be a surprise cut is Larrell Murchison, but I think Murch finds a way to make the team just because Murch isn't a guy who's going to play nose tackle. He's going to play 3 technique lined up over the guard. He's going to play a little bit of 5 technique lined up over the inside shoulder of the offensive tackle, or if you want to call that 4-eye or whatever. And the Titans need balance, where Teair Tart is a guy who's primarily just going to play that nose tackle spot. And then you have Naquan Jones, who is a guy who can kind of play that 3 technique and that nose tackle spot. Then you have Murchison, who's a guy who can not only play some 3 technique, but also could play that 4-eye, 5 technique closer to the offensive tackle. It's about creating balance with your defensive line. So you have 2 guys who can play your nose position. Then you have Harold Landry, or you have Jeff Simmons, who is your primary 3 tech. You got a guy like Larrell Murchison and a guy like Naquan Jones who can back him up. And I want to see another guy in Jaden Peavy, the undrafted free agent out of Texas A&M. I think that he has a real chance at 6'5", 320 pounds. He is a bigger guy, like Tart and Jones, or are not small men by any means, but they're right above 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", right around 300 pounds. A guy like Peavy is just a bigger bodied guy. I think he could play a little bit of what Danico Autry does as a 5 technique over the offensive tackle, or as a 4-3 defensive end. I think Peavy maybe has those capabilities. I think he could play some 3 tech as well. So Peavy is a guy who provides versatility up and down the offensive line, something that the Titans don't have a lot of depth of. So that's what I'm looking at here. Another guy who I guess you could consider defensive line is DeMarcus Walker coming over from Houston. I think he does make the team. Him and Danico Autry both can kind of do a little bit of inside-outside work. So whether you want to put them at edge or put them D-line, I'm putting them D-line. So that's what I would have, is those 7 guys as defensive linemen, with Danico Autry and DeMarcus Walker, guys who have the ability to maybe play a little bit more on the edge as well. So you think about it, you have Tartan Jones holding down that middle. Then you have Simmons, and you have Murch, and you have PV as a guy who can kind of play the exterior of the interior and interior. And then you have a guy like Autry, and you have a guy like Walker who could play the edge and the exterior of the interior. So there you go. It's all about having versatility throughout. At the edge, Harold Landry, Bud Dupree, Rashad Weaver, Ola Adeni. Keeping it simple there. I'm going with 7 guys on the D line with 2 guys who could play on the edge in Autry and Walker, so I can limit myself at the edge. I don't need Justin Lawler. I don't need David Anini. Those aren't guys that I think are roster level right now. I'll talk about the practice squad at the end of the show, but I'd like to see one of those guys on the practice squad for some more development. So only going with 4 edge rushers because I'm going with 7 defensive linemen. So moving forward into linebacker, I'm only rocking with 4. I considered 5. My initial rough draft of the 53-man roster, I had 5. But with what I'm getting in special teams value from other positions, I decided to just go with 4 guys who I think can play linebacker. David Long, Zach Cunningham, Monty Rice, and Chance Campbell. Now, with Monty Rice's injury, being on PUP to start training camp, if that lingers at all, it was an Achilles, then yes, I think the Titans will ultimately look to keep another linebacker, and they would maybe make concession at safety is a place that if I decided to keep a Dylan Cole, a Jack Gibbons, if I decided to do that, Joe Jones, I guess, then I would make a cut at safety, and I'll explain that when I get to safety. But 4 linebackers for me, and that's what the Titans had last year when they had their linebackers healthy as well. So that makes sense. Moving forward to cornerback, I went with 5 cornerbacks. Christian Fulton, Caleb Farley, Elijah Molden, Roger McCreary, locks for me. And then I went with Buster Skrine. He did such a good job in the slot last year. And you got Molden, McCreary, and Skrine, who are all kind of smaller guys. I think McCreary could play a little bit on the outside as well. So with that 5th and final guy, I want a guy who can really play in the slot for me, which is Skrine. And Skrine can be the 3rd down cornerback like his role was last year early on until McCreary is ready for that, because I'm expecting Elijah Molden to take the Dane Crookshank tight end stopper roll and dime. So Skrine could do that until McCreary is ready. And then if things happen, McCreary can provide some depth for Fulton and Farley on the outside. And then you have Skrine to continue to play that slot if McCreary eventually takes over that full-time passing down slot role, which he could. And then there's injuries on the outside. You have McCreary for that. Skrine as your backup slot. So that's how I would do that. It was hard to not go with a guy like Greg Maben. Maybe you take out Jaden Peavy and you put in Greg Maben. So you have only 6 defensive linemen, and you have 6 cornerbacks, and then you could take away one of the 5 safeties that I picked and put that towards linebacker. And that's kind of where I would think that maybe if I get any of these predictions wrong, which I'm sure I will, that's where I could see the Titans maybe making some changes, going with some more linebacker, going with some more cornerback. But I only went with 5 cornerbacks right now. And then at safety, I went with 5 safeties as well. And I went with Byard, Hooker, Theo Jackson, A.J. Moore, and then Joshua Kalu, who was just added by the Titans. My opinion is when the Titans go out and they get these veterans who they've had on the team before, think Corey Levin, think Michael Pruitt, when they do stuff like that, it's because they have an exact role on the roster they know that this guy can fill. That's why they went and get him. To me, they're looking for other guys, see if they can get a better version of that player in that role. If they don't find it and it's lesser, then they're like, okay, well, we know that Joshua Kalu can play this special teams role as one of our safety roster spots. We know he can do that. And we know that while we wanted something a little better, it's better than what we've seen so far in camp. And that's why I think a guy like Josh Kalu is getting brought in will make the team, because they know exactly what they want him to do. So 5 safeties. So on defense, Jeffrey Simmons, Danico Autry, Tierra Tart, Naquan Jones, Laurel Murchison, Jaden Peavy, Harold Landry, Bud Dupree, Rashad Weaver, Ola Adeni, DeMarcus Walker, David Long, Zach Cunningham, Monty Rice, Chance Campbell, Christian Fulton, Caleb Farley, Elijah Molden, Roger McCreary, Buster Skrine, Kevin Byard, Amani Hooker, Theo Jackson, A.J. Moore, Joshua Kalu. So that's the offense and the defense. We are going to talk about special teams and who I want to see make the Titans practice squad in just a moment. Titans fans, we are going to cap off my 53-man roster prediction with special teams and the guys who I don't think will make the team, but that I want to see on the Titans practice squad. Before we get into it, I want to thank you guys again for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first to listen every day. Make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you do stream. But as for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. It's also Monday through Friday, free and available on all platforms, including the Locked On NFL YouTube page. You get all of your Titans news here with me every day. Get all your national NFL news with the Locked On NFL podcast. I actually host the Thursday show of the Locked On NFL podcast. So if you were subscribed over there, you'd be showing support to me in that way as well. It's free. So why not just head over there and hit the subscribe button just to help your boy out? I mean, come on. It won't take that much time. But either way, we're going to round out my 53-man roster predictions here with special teams and with the guys I want to see on the practice squad. So for special teams, we have 3 spots left. I've gone through 50 players on offense and defense, and that's fine because you need 3 slots. Brett Kern, Randy Bulletproof Bullock. I was watching the Seattle game from last year, just doing some tape study and different things that I do on a daily basis because I'm an absolute football nerd and I love it. But Randy Bullock, game-winning kick in overtime in Seattle. Bulletproof Bullock, baby. I was hyped for him. Absolutely hyped for him. That was awesome. So Randy Bullock, a little underappreciated right now. And with Caleb Shudick's injury and being on PUP, I think Bullock has a stranglehold on the starting kicker position for the Titans. So Brett Kern, Randy Bullock, and then Morgan Cox at long snapper. He's a Pro Bowl, all-pro level long snapper. Not even a question there. Easiest positions that I did during this entire exercise. So with all 53 roster spots now accounted for the Titans, we got to talk about something that's just as important. As we learned last year, the practice squad is incredibly important because depth is incredibly important as the Titans went through 91 different players, an all-time record last year. So those practice squad spots, here's where I have them. Number 1, give me Julius Chestnut. Now, I know it's probably going to be Jordan Wilkins because he's probably a better special teams player than Julius Chestnut, the undrafted free agent running back out of Sacred Heart. But hear me out here. The Titans, and my version of the roster, I went with a bunch of special teams, really only contributors. Trenton Cannon, Ola Daney, Chance Campbell, Theo, AJ Moore, Joshua Kalu. I mean, I went with a bunch of special teams contributors with the 53-man roster. So on the practice squad, if I have a lot of special teams guys on the real roster already who I keep on my practice squad at certain spots, I want to be guys who I think could come in and play those positions, not just special teams. So if I'm going to keep a running back, I want a guy who can run the ball. And Julius Chestnut is a better runner of the football than Jordan Wilkins, in my opinion. So keep me Julius Chestnut at wide receiver. Des Fitzpatrick, you got a guy who can come in and actually just play wide receiver if you need to pull one up. You got Racey McMath, a guy who can be a primary special teams player if you need special teams help. And then Mason Kinsey, who is your backup slot wide receiver. So you got Dez as your backup boundary receiver. Mason Kinsey is your backup slot receiver. Racey McMath is your backup special teams primary wide receiver. That's what I would want there. Tommy Hudson on the practice squad. Again, I think Tommy Hudson will spend more time on the Titans roster as the number 4 tight end. I'll give it to Briley Moore early because Tommy Hudson's coming off the injury, but I think the Titans would want Tommy Hudson back on the roster. And if injury is what keeps him off the initial roster, then yeah, he'll be able to get back on the Titans practice squad. On the offensive line, Christian DeLauro, who I said I thought was a really good tackle for the Titans in preseason last year. Would like to keep developing him and keep him on the practice squad as a guy I trust to kind of come in and be a backup tackle if he gets called up. Daniel Murner on the interior offensive line. I don't understand it. I'd rather see Xavier Newman, the undrafted free agent, or Hayden Howerton get an opportunity to get that practice squad spot. But clearly they trust Murner, and if they needed someone to call up, they'd want to bring him up because he knows what to do, but I just don't understand. But it's my prediction. Haskell Garrett as Naquan Jones, T.R. Tart, penetrating interior guy. Kevin Strong as that Larrell Murchison, DeMarcus Walker backup style guy. And I'd like to see him keep David Anini, who is the undrafted free agent out of Houston. 6'2", 240 pounds, smaller guy, probably can't hold up and run defense on a down-to-down basis. That has some good pass rush ability, long arms, good bend, good flexibility. So let's keep progressing that and see if we can bulk him up a little bit for a roster spot next year. At linebacker, I'd like to see Dylan Cole and Jack Gibbons kept. If the Titans only go with 4 linebackers on the initial roster, I'd like to see 2 of them kept on special teams. At cornerback, Greg Mabin. So you have that backup outside corner. I went with some smaller guys with the final 3 spots at corner. So a boundary cornerback on the practice squad. And then Chris Jackson, who is going to be a primary special teams guy who can help you out if that's what you need and can play some slot. So you're covered there with boundary and slot and special teams. Safety, I'd like to keep Michael Griffin around. He's a guy who could play on special teams, hard-nosed, physical player. I think he could back up Theo Jackson and Elijah Molden as that dime linebacker. So I'd like to keep a look at him. And then you need a backup kicker just in case your kicker gets hurt throughout the week. So hopefully Caleb Shudak is healed by then. Stash him on the practice squad. And you got him as a backup and a guy you can keep working with, as well as Randy Bullock is not a long-term option at kicker, even if he is locked in for this season, in my opinion. So that is my 53-man roster prediction for offense, defense, special teams. My predictions for the Titans practice squad as well. There's going to be a ton of churn during training camp. A lot of these guys who we're talking about right now will probably get cut during training camp, and new players from other training camps brought in over them. I'm going to monitor all that, bringing you guys all the latest updated Tennessee Titans news Monday through Friday, every single night. So make sure you stay subscribed or get subscribed to the Locked On Titans podcast. That's going to do it for me today, though, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.